We're in the worst place we've ever been in terms of strain with our allies. I mean, our allies are clearly saying they have lost faith in the old system that was led by the United States in terms of transatlantic unity. I mean, German Chancellor Merz said the same thing yesterday at Munich. He said, that old heyday of transatlantic partnership is finished. Mark Carney put it poignantly and succinctly in Davos when he said the same thing, more or less, that international rules-based order that had been largely created by the U.S. is finished. So the real question is, and also with President Trump threatening to take Greenland even by force, regardless of what NATO ally Denmark wants. So I think what you see in public opinion polling, many more, in fact, a majority of Europeans now look at the U.S. as a threat rather than a friend.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has warned his European allies that there is a new era in geopolitics ahead of his speech in around an hour's time at the Munich Security Conference. But his tone will be more conciliatory than Vice President J.D. Vance's last year in Munich, when he suggested the US and Europe no longer shared the same values.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values shared with the United States of America.
Well, let's speak now to Matthew Bryza, former US ambassador. Good morning to you.
Hello, Chloe. Nice to be with you.
Well, thank you very much for being with us. What do you think is the significance of Marco Rubio going this year after what happened last year with J.D. Vance?
I think it's big. Vance was appalling. And, as a career diplomat, I could never imagine any American leader lecturing our allies like Vance did. Totally inappropriate. In fact, I think it hurt Vance a bit, although in the short run, people were cheering him in Trump land. Rubio is a traditional national security sort of conservative hawk. He's knowledgeable. He really is an expert on foreign policy. And so I think Trump is sending Rubio to see if not necessarily he can mend fences, but whether he can generate some momentum. Collective momentum to try to get a peace agreement or ceasefire in Ukraine over the end line.
So do you think it's a conscious decision by the Trump administration to send Marco Rubio, who is less combative than J.D. Vance?
Absolutely. And he's not just less combative. Yes, he's less combative, but he understands how to speak to allies. Also, something to keep in mind in the background is that Rubio and Vance are by far the leading contenders to succeed Trump as a Republican candidate for president. And so it's as if Trump tried out Vance last year. Rubio's got his chance now. And Rubio's star has really been ascending over the last year in the Trump administration.
How strained do you think the relationship is currently between the US, NATO, Europe? I mean, we've obviously heard some really stark words from the US administration, but where do you think we are right now?
I think we're in the worst place we've ever been in terms of strain with our allies. I mean, our allies are clearly saying they have lost faith in the old system that was led by the United States in terms of transatlantic unity. I mean, German Chancellor Merz said the same thing yesterday at Munich. He said, that old heyday of transatlantic partnership is finished. Mark Carney put it poignantly and succinctly in Davos when he said the same thing, more or less, that international rules-based order that had been largely created by the U.S. is finished. So the real question is, and also with President Trump threatening to take Greenland even by force, regardless of what NATO ally Denmark wants. So I think what you see in public opinion polling, many more, in fact, a majority of Europeans now look at the U.S. as a threat rather than a friend.
And is it finished even beyond Donald Trump's time in office? And of course, it could be followed by someone who has a similar viewpoint to Donald Trump, but it could also be followed by a Democrat or a Republican who does want to restore that relationship. Or do you think that is gone now forever?
Well, nothing like this it should be ruled out forever. I have this debate with my friends all the time, too, my foreign policy friends. I'm pessimistic because I think that once you break a bond of trust like this, a bond of trust that's about nuclear deterrence in the end, and that the U.S. would do something irrational, which is if, let's say, I don't know, Warsaw, I'm a Polish American, so I love Warsaw. If Warsaw were attacked by Russia, the U.S. could respond with nuclear weapons, which would then mean sacrificing a major U.S. city. That readiness to sacrifice on the basis of a theoretical pledge of deterrence, That's a logical stretch. And with the way the U.S. has been behaving, it makes it even harder to believe that the U.S. would respond even in the future. I'll put it a different way. We had Trump, who was talking about breaking these transatlantic bonds once. He was beaten by Biden, a real strong Atlanticist. But then the U.S. brought Trump back. So it will take, I think, a generation or two of more traditional U.S. transatlanticists for that bond of trust to be restored. But of course, that's not impossible.
Donald Trump and members of his administration have spoken in quite stark terms about how Europe needs to step up, needs to take more responsibility for its own security, not just through money, although that is obviously part of it in how much GDP spend is given to NATO to protect the alliance, but also in terms of just physically being present. Do you think that Europe is sufficiently responding to that? And do you think President Trump thinks they are?
Right. I think I agree with President Trump on that. I mean, for too many years, for too many decades, Europe had grown complacent and depended on the U.S. Security umbrella. I mean, as you know, I served 4 years in the White House under President Bush. I was in the middle of national security decision making. And on the other hand, the U.S. welcomed being a leader for a long time. That's a nice position to be in. But in terms of pure economics, it was time for Europe to step up. I think Europe is really trying now. It's gotten the message when the UK and France and others are talking about coalitions of the willing to put troops on the ground in Ukraine as part of a peace settlement. That's a huge change. Or when Germany has made these gigantic pledges to increase defense spending that former Chancellor Scholz did, that's a big change. The problem is delivery. And when the economic rubber meets the road of these defense spending requirements, we see non-delivery. Certainly in Germany. Germany has fallen far short on delivering in the economic contributions needed to replace the U.S. in terms of the defense capabilities. But I have to say, I find great optimism in the fact that the UK and France are ready to put troops on the ground in Ukraine as a security guarantee.
How do you think the relationship needs to change now between Europe and the US to put it back on track? Particularly, I'm thinking with the context of, threats over Greenland. And was there a suggestion that it would be taken by force, then reining back on that? How do we repair those relations? Do the Europeans need to stand up to Donald Trump more? Do they need to keep cowering to him? How does it work?
I do think the Europeans need to stand up more to President Trump. You see that once Denmark and the Greenlandic authorities did so, and other NATO allies chimed in including Prime Minister Starmer, by the way, in defense of Denmark, Trump backed off. Now, he still has designs on Greenland, but at least those ridiculous threats to use force against a NATO ally, which would absolutely be the end of NATO, have receded. So, yeah, Europe needs to step up and resist. And Trump is a bully. By the way, I'm nonpartisan. I'm not a member of any party, but he's a bully, and it's a classic bully. You need to stand up to them, and they will back down. When it comes to, tariff threats, there's a cliche that was coined by an American economist, which is taco. Trump always chickens out. So when China stood up to Trump on tariffs and threatened to cut off the flow of rare earths to the United States, Trump backed off, and now he wants a trade deal with China. So I think our European allies need to do the same. And then we need to move into the post-Trump era when maybe there is a president like Marco Rubio, or like you said, Chloe, a traditional transatlanticist Democrat. Then we can start rebuilding the trust. And it would be from a position of strength, especially, again, if France and the UK provide troops on the ground in Ukraine, and if European members of NATO continue spending on defense to raise their capabilities, that could be a great fresh new start for transatlantic NATO.
So finally, let's look ahead to US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. As we say, just under an hour's time, we're expecting him to get to his feet and make his speech in Munich at this security conference. What are you expecting and indeed hoping to hear from him?
Yeah, I'm hoping to hear a call for transatlantic solidarity, but one in which Europe does what you and I have just been talking about, Chloe, really steps up, both in terms of troop presence eastward, like in Ukraine, and military spending. And he says that the U.S. is not anti-Europe. If you look at Trump's national security strategy, what it says is the U.S. wants a strong Europe. It needs a strong Europe. But Europe needs to live up to its own values. I hope he won't say anything about Europe's own values, because it's only in Europe where President Trump has lectured countries on the need to live up to democratic values. He doesn't do that anywhere else, not in, Indo-Pacific region, not with regard to China, with Russia, Latin America, or the United States itself, where he's undermined a lot of democratic norms. It's only in Europe where he's talking about democracy. I hope Rubio does not do that and really focuses on the traditional message of we all have to be in this together, but Europe needs to grow stronger, and we want to help Europe grow stronger. By the way, what will also be interesting is that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's a left of center, far left member of the U.S. Congress, is a front runner to be maybe his opponent in the next presidential election. And I expect her to be critical of U.S. And European elites in the context of the Epstein scandal. And, she'll be talking about corruption on both sides of the Atlantic. And that'll be a completely different form of solidarity, calling on the citizens on both sides of the Atlantic of their countries to rise up and fight against corrupt elites.
It's lovely to speak to you this morning. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Chloe. My pleasure.
That is Matthew Bryza, former US ambassador.